Welcome back to another Explainer. Today we're unpacking a pretty fascinating piece of political commentary from NERC News. Now, right off the bat, we aren't here to validate or debunk these views, okay? Instead, we're going to objectively break down exactly how this host constructs their arguments about redistricting, elections, and the Constitution. It's kind of a masterclass in political framing. And honestly, by mapping out the logic visually, we can really understand how this type of media shapes public perception. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've got three main areas to cover today. First up, constitutional hypocrisy claims. Then we'll look at the 2020 census dispute. And finally, redistricting and political maps. So, starting with Section 1, constitutional hypocrisy claims, or as the source calls it, the flip-flop argument.
This whole commentary really builds its foundation on a specific idea, relying heavily on this quote right here from commentator Lydia Moynihan. In order to protect the Constitution, we need to expand the court, undermine the judiciary, eliminate the Electoral College. This quote right here, it perfectly establishes the exact tone the host uses to frame the political left. The core argument being presented is that the left spent years warning about constitutional threats, right? But now, according to the host, they're claiming they need to save democracy by, well, actively dismantling its foundational rules.
So the crucial point here is how the source categorizes these specific policy proposals, things like packing the Supreme Court, scrapping the Electoral College, and adding D.C. and Puerto Rico as states. The commentary explicitly argues that these absolutely are not genuine reforms. Instead, the host labels them as calculated power grabs, just up as democracy, and initiated the literal second the party lost an election. It's a really interesting framing device meant to portray structural change as basically nothing more than sore losing. And this brilliantly illustrates how the source structures its entire narrative. It creates this super stark binary contrast. It paints Democrats on the left as undermining the Constitution, while placing Republicans on the right as defending federalism and originalism. By setting up this black and white dichotomy right out of the gate, the host effectively primes the audience. You're meant to view any subsequent legal or political maneuver through this exact lens, the idea that one side is destroying the system while the other side is stepping up to protect it. Moving right along to Section 2. The 2020 census dispute, where we'll focus on data and litigation. Let's move to and see how this builds, because here we transition away from that sweeping constitutional rhetoric and into the actual nuts and bolts of population counting. The commentary maps out a very specific timeline. It claims that after the 2020 census data was collected, the incoming Biden administration introduced what the host calls new novel statistical methods. And the big assertion here? That this intervention led directly to Republican states losing congressional seats they were rightfully due based on the raw population numbers. So this immediately sets up a narrative that the foundational data for all future elections was essentially manipulated. To hammer this point home, the source makes a highly specific, pretty dramatic claim. The host states that the Census Bureau admitted to an error where literally 100% of the population undercounting happened in Republican states and 100% of the overcounting happened in Democrat states. Now, whether you're a total political data junkie or just a casual observer, recognizing this kind of absolute 100-0 statistical claim is crucial. Why? Because it's used by the host as the ultimate proof of a rigged system. It perfectly bridges the gap between raw census data and the actual drawing of political maps.
And that brings us to our third and final section, redistricting and political maps, along with the resulting legal battle. Here is where the commentary really links those previous census disputes directly to modern congressional maps. The host argues that current Republican redistricting efforts are simply about correcting the record. They claim Republicans are going about it constitutionally, using established legal processes to reflect where populations actually live. On the flip side, the commentary asserts that Democratic efforts rely on illegal gerrymandering, suing, and what the host specifically calls judge shopping in front of liberal judges to knock out Republican seats. So the narrative here essentially positions the ongoing court battles not as your typical mutual political tug-of-war, but as one side adhering to the law and the other side actively breaking it. The commentary then traces the origin of this specific redistricting behavior back exactly 14 years. The host asserts that 14 years ago, Democrats began freaking out that census takers knocking on doors would proverbially put illegal immigrants under the gun, thereby suppressing participation and, as a result, leading to fewer assumed votes for their party. According to the source, this historical anxiety is exactly what birthed the left's current strategy of fighting in the courts rather than simply trying to earn votes organically through policy. To ground these broader claims in a real-world scenario, the source brings up a specific anecdote about the state of Virginia. The host points to Virginia's recent rejection of what they call a 10-to-1 Democrat power grab map.
By citing this specific rejection, the commentary is basically attempting to justify its overarching claim that courts are actively tossing out illegal democratic maps because they circumvent those established legal processes we talked about just a minute ago.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the source's ultimate conclusion regarding political strategy. It creates yet another stark contrast. It claims Democrats are solely focused on changing the rules, suing and resisting. Meanwhile, it claims Republicans are succeeding the old-fashioned way by actually attracting voters. The host specifically highlights demographic shifts, like Hispanic voters moving hard toward the conservative agenda, as the real reason behind Republican electoral strength, rather than, say, the dark magic of gerrymandering that the left allegedly employs.
Which brings us to the end of the commentary's argument. The host concludes with this exact provocative question. How obvious does Democrats' hypocrisy on the Constitution have to get before even more people walk away from their party? It's a really powerful rhetorical closer, perfectly designed to solidify the viewer's alignment with the host's perspective. It leaves us to ponder not just the mechanics of redistricting and the census, but how highly structured political commentary actually shapes public perception of our most fundamental institutional rules. Seriously, when you map it all out visually like this, you can really see the machinery behind the message. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this breakdown helped you see exactly how these partisan arguments are constructed. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll catch you next time.